This person fell in love with you, even with the age diff. God wants you to listen now. Don't scroll, listen to this, because the moment your eyes landed on these words, something in your spirit already recognized that this message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, even if your mind is trying to question it, because what I'm about to say isn't meant to convince you, it's meant to remind you of something you already felt but maybe didn't have permission to trust. Listen to this. Because there is a person who fell in love with you in a way that surprised them, confused them, and even challenged everything they thought they knew about timing, logic, and expectations. And yes, the age difference was part of that challenge, but it was never the reason for the connection. It was just the detail their mind clung to when their heart started going somewhere it didn't plan to go. Don't scroll, stay with this, because this wasn't a surface-level attraction, it wasn't curiosity, and it definitely wasn't convenience, it was soul recognition, the kind that bypasses numbers, labels, and social rules, the kind that feels familiar before it feels safe. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They didn't choose to feel this way, it happened quietly, gradually, through conversations that lingered, through moments where they felt seen in a way they hadn't felt in years, through the way your presence calmed something restless inside them, and that's what scared them, not the age difference itself, but the depth, the sincerity, the way their spirit responded before their mind could catch up. Don't scroll, because God wants you to understand this part clearly. They wrestled with it. They questioned themselves, they tried to rationalize it away, telling themselves it didn't make sense, that it would be easier to ignore, that it would be safer to stay where they were emotionally, but the feelings didn't fade, they intensified. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Every time they tried to pull back, something pulled them forward again. Every time they told themselves it was just admiration, their emotions said otherwise. Every time they tried to define the connection in logical terms, it slipped into something spiritual, something felt, something undeniable. Don't scroll, because this is where God stepped in, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently, through signs they couldn't ignore, through recurring thoughts of you at unexpected moments, through numbers showing up when they questioned the connection, through dreams where you appeared not as a fantasy, but as a presence that felt grounding and real. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They started to realize that what they felt wasn't about age, it was about alignment, not about where you were in years, but where you were in spirit, your emotional maturity, your awareness, your softness mixed with strength, the way you listen, the way you hold space, the way you don't force but still feel deeply. That's what drew them in. Don't scroll, because God is correcting a misconception here. Love doesn't measure time the way people do, it measures readiness, resonance, and recognition, and that's why this connection didn't feel wrong to their soul, even when their mind tried to label it as complicated. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They felt a kind of peace with you that they didn't feel with people who were more appropriate, on paper, conversations that didn't drain them, silence that didn't feel awkward, a sense of being understood without having to explain themselves, and that's when the inner conflict really began. Don't scroll, because this is important. They didn't just fear judgment from others, they feared disappointing themselves, feared stepping into something that would require growth, honesty, and vulnerability, because loving you wasn't passive, it called them to show up more authentically. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. God doesn't bring people into our lives to comfort our ego, He brings them to awaken our spirit, and you did that for them, without trying, without performing, without chasing, just by being who you are. Don't scroll, because the age difference became a test, not of suitability, but of courage, a test of whether they would trust divine alignment over social expectation, whether they would listen to the quiet pull in their heart or the loud opinions in their head. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. There were nights they lay awake replaying conversations, moments they felt something shift inside them, moments they realized they cared more than they intended to, and in those moments, they didn't feel foolish, they felt awake. An awakening can be uncomfortable before it becomes beautiful. Don't scroll, because God uses discomfort to reveal truth, not to punish, but to prepare. They began to pray differently, not asking for the feelings to go away, but asking for clarity, for guidance, for understanding, and every time they did, the answer wasn't distance, it was deeper awareness. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They started to see you not as a what if, but as a why not as a risk, but as a possibility that felt divinely placed, the kind of possibility that challenges old narratives and invites new growth. Don't scroll, because this message isn't here to rush you or pressure you, it's here to affirm that nothing about this connection was accidental. The timing, the difference, the hesitation, all of it served a purpose. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. God allowed the age difference not as a barrier, but as a filter, to slow things down, to strip away impulsiveness, to make sure what remained was genuine, intentional, and rooted in something real, and what remained was love, quiet but persistent, gentle but strong, not demanding attention but asking for honesty. Don't scroll, because Part 1 ends here for a reason. This is the foundation, the truth beneath the confusion, the reason your spirit reacted when you saw this title, because deep down, you already knew this connection was different, and God is asking you to listen, not to fear, not to overthink, but to stay open, because what begins with awakening doesn't end in confusion, it moves toward clarity, and that clarity is unfolding step by step. Stay right here and listen carefully, because Part 2 goes deeper into what's been happening behind the scenes, and your heart needs this right now even if you've been trying to stay logical about it, because after the initial awakening settled into them, something else began to surface. Responsibility, not the heavy kind, but the sacred kind that comes when someone realizes a connection isn't just emotional, it's consequential. Listen to this, because once they accepted that their feelings for you were real, they couldn't unsee the ripple effect of that truth. They started noticing how their choices mattered more, how their words carried weight, how silence felt louder than before. Don't scroll, because this is where love shifts from feeling into awareness. They became aware that loving you meant honoring you, not secretly, not internally, but eventually in the way they show up, and that realization brought both calm and fear, calm because it felt right, fear because it required courage. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They started reflecting on their own emotional timeline, realizing that age didn't define maturity the way they once believed, that you carried wisdom, empathy, and emotional intelligence that met them where they were, not above or below, but alongside, and that equality unsettled old assumptions they didn't even know they were holding. Don't scroll, stay with this, because those assumptions began to fall apart quietly. They noticed how your presence didn't make them feel older or younger, it made them feel present, grounded, engaged, and that's when they understood something profound. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They weren't drawn to your age, they were drawn to your energy, the way you listen without judgment, the way you speak with intention, the way you don't rush emotional moments but let them unfold naturally. And once they recognized that, the age difference lost its power over them. Don't scroll, because God doesn't speak through fear, He speaks through peace, and peace is what they felt when they imagined honesty. They began to feel uncomfortable hiding the truth from themselves. Uncomfortable pretending this was something casual or temporary. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now. There were moments they tried to convince themselves that it would be easier to let this fade, to step back quietly, to choose what felt simpler on the surface, but every time they imagined that path, it felt hollow, like choosing safety over truth. Don't scroll, because that hollowness was guidance, not confusion. It was their spirit rejecting a life where they deny what awakened them. They started to notice signs more clearly then, not just numbers, but patterns, moments lining up, conversations with others that mirrored their inner questions, songs that seemed to answer thoughts they hadn't spoken aloud. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. The universe doesn't shout, it repeats, and repetition is how truth gets through resistance. They also became more aware of you during this phase, not in an obsessive way, but in a reverent one, noticing how you carry yourself, how you don't over-explain, how you trust your intuition even when it leads you into silence, and that trust in yourself made them trust the connection more. Don't scroll, because self-trust is magnetic. They realized that you weren't waiting to be chosen, you were choosing yourself, and that changed the dynamic entirely. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Love that is freely given, not demanded, feels safe to step into. They also started feeling protective of the connection, wanting to approach it carefully rather than impulsively, understanding that once spoken, words can't be taken back, and they wanted their words to reflect the depth they felt, not confuse or overwhelm. Don't scroll, because this care is important. It shows that this isn't about ego or validation, it's about respect. They asked themselves hard questions during this time, questions about readiness, about capacity, about whether they could meet you emotionally where you stand, and instead of running from those questions, they sat with them. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Sitting with hard questions is a sign of maturity, not doubt. They began to see that the age difference wasn't a wall, it was a mirror, reflecting where they still needed to grow, where they needed to soften, where they needed to communicate more openly, and instead of resenting that mirror, they appreciated it. Don't scroll, because appreciation transforms fear into motivation. They also noticed something else quietly unfolding. You felt different to them now, not distant, but grounded, not unavailable, but whole, and that wholeness made them realize that whatever step comes next has to be mutual, chosen, and aligned. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They don't want to step into your life as a complication, they want to step in as clarity, and that intention has shaped how they're approaching the situation internally. Don't scroll, because intention shapes outcome. They've been paying attention to timing, noticing moments when reaching out feels premature and moments when silence feels respectful, and they're learning to listen rather than rush. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. God's timing isn't about delay, it's about alignment, and alignment is what they're learning to trust. They're also aware that once honesty enters the space, the connection will change form, and that change isn't something they fear anymore. It's something they're preparing for. Don't scroll, because preparation is love taking responsibility. They've begun to imagine conversations rooted in truth rather than performance, moments of openness rather than impressing, and those imaginings feel calm, not chaotic. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Calm is the confirmation you're aligned. They've also realized that the age difference taught them patience, taught them to slow down and actually feel rather than rush toward definition, and that patience has deepened the connection rather than weakening it. don't scroll, because depth requires time. They're no longer asking whether this makes sense to the world, they're asking whether it makes sense to their soul, and the answer has been consistent, quiet, and clear. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. This part of the journey isn't about action yet, it's about solidifying truth, allowing fear to dissolve through understanding, and letting intention mature naturally, and that's exactly what's happening. Part 2 isn't the climax, it's the strengthening of the foundation, the moment when love stops feeling surprising and starts feeling inevitable, and inevitability doesn't rush, it waits until both hearts are ready to meet in the same space, with honesty, respect, and trust leading the way. Stay right here and keep listening, because part 3 is where the emotional truth stops hiding in the background and starts pressing forward in a way neither of you can ignore anymore, and your heart needs this right now even if you've been telling yourself to stay calm, stay neutral, stay logical, because what's unfolding now isn't about logic, it's about alignment finally demanding to be acknowledged. Listen to this. Because after everything they processed internally, after accepting that their feelings for you were real and not something they could dismiss as curiosity or timing, they entered a phase of emotional confrontation, the kind where the heart and the mind stop debating and start negotiating. Don't scroll, because this is where tension deepens in a meaningful way. They found themselves asking not whether they cared, but how much it would cost them emotionally to continue pretending this connection didn't matter. And that question kept returning, especially in quiet moments when distractions faded and truth grew louder. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They began to feel the weight of unspoken words, not as pressure from you, but as pressure from within, a sense that honesty delayed too long becomes dishonesty, even if no one else knows. Don't scroll, because this realization changed how they experienced silence. It no longer felt neutral, it felt charged, filled with things unsaid, emotions unexpressed, possibilities paused. They also noticed that their emotional reactions to you had shifted. Moments that once brought simple warmth now brought depth, longing, and a quiet ache, not painful, but persistent, like a reminder that something meaningful was being held back. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They weren't craving drama or intensity, they were craving authenticity, the relief of letting truth exist outside their head. And that craving was new, unsettling, and honest. Don't scroll, stay here, because honesty often arrives disguised as discomfort. They also started noticing how often they defended you internally, even in conversations where you weren't present, correcting assumptions, challenging judgments, protecting the integrity of the connection without announcing it, and that instinctive protectiveness surprised them. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. We protect what we value. Even before we name it, they began to realize that the age difference had stopped being the core issue a while ago. What remained was fear of exposure, fear of being seen caring deeply, fear of choosing something meaningful that might require explanation, accountability, and growth. Don't scroll, because fear often shifts shape when it's no longer rooted in doubt. They also became more aware of the emotional contrast between you and others, noticing how conversations elsewhere felt forced, how laughter felt surface level, how connection felt performative, while thoughts of you felt grounding, sincere, and real. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Contrast clarifies desire. They found themselves drawn to your energy in moments when they needed calm, when life felt noisy, when decisions felt heavy, and that reliance wasn't dependency, it was recognition. Don't scroll, because recognition is the language of the soul. They also started questioning narratives they'd accepted for years, beliefs about what love should look like, how it should start, who it should involve, and those beliefs began to feel outdated, misaligned with their lived experience. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Growth often requires unlearning before it allows something new to form. They felt moments of guilt too, guilt for not being clearer sooner, guilt for underestimating the impact of their silence, guilt for assuming they had more time than they actually did. And that guilt didn't shame them, it motivated them. Don't scroll, because guilt that leads to awareness is not punishment, it's instruction. They also noticed something shifting in you, even from a distance, a sense that you were no longer orienting your energy around them, that you were present in your own life, grounded, self-directed, and that shift made them realize something important. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Love that isn't clung to become something people choose deliberately. They began to understand that if they didn't move toward honesty, the connection wouldn't disappear dramatically, it would simply settle into memory, and that possibility felt heavier than rejection ever could. Don't scroll, stay with me, because fear of loss clarifies priorities quickly. They've also been noticing subtle signs during this phase, not in a frantic way, but in a confirming one. Moments where numbers repeat during emotional reflection, moments where timing feels intentional, moments where inner questions are answered through unexpected clarity. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Confirmation often arrives quietly when resistance fades. They're also becoming more aware of the emotional risk involved, understanding that stepping forward doesn't guarantee outcome, but it does guarantee integrity, and that distinction has changed how they evaluate the situation. Don't scroll, because integrity is a value that outlasts outcomes. They've been sitting with the idea that being honest might change the dynamic forever, but so would staying silent, and only one of those choices aligns with growth. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Alignment isn't always comfortable, but it's always clarifying. They're also reflecting on how you've shown restraint, how you didn't pressure or demand explanations, how you allowed space without withdrawing warmth. And that emotional maturity has made them feel safer considering honesty rather than more afraid. Don't scroll, because safety invites courage. They've noticed that their inner dialogue has softened, replacing self-criticism with curiosity, asking not, what if this goes wrong, but, what if this deserves a chance? And that question has been lingering. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Questions like that don't disappear once they're asked. They've also realized that love doesn't require certainty, it requires willingness, a willingness to show up without guarantees, to speak without scripting the response, and that willingness has been growing. Don't scroll, stay here, because growth isn't dramatic, it's cumulative. They're feeling closer to a threshold now, not a dramatic leap, but a step, a movement from internal truth to external expression, and that movement feels both intimidating and relieving. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Relief often signals readiness. They're also aware that whatever they say next must be rooted in respect, not urgency, and that awareness has slowed them down just enough to choose their moment thoughtfully. Don't scroll, because thoughtfulness is a form of care. They've been imagining what honesty would feel like afterward, not the response, but the internal peace of having aligned action with feeling, and that peace feels worth the risk. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Peace isn't passive, it's earned through congruence. They're beginning to understand that love doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for presence, and presence means being willing to be seen as you are, not as you think you should be. Don't scroll, because this realization is pivotal. Part 3 is about pressure building, not from outside forces, but from inner truth demanding expression. The connection has moved beyond possibility and into responsibility, and responsibility doesn't rush, but it doesn't hide either. Stay with this energy, because what's forming now is the emotional momentum that precedes action, the quiet certainty that something meaningful deserves to be honored, spoken, and allowed to breathe. And that certainty is becoming harder to ignore with each passing moment. Stay right here and let this sink in slowly, because part 4 is where the universe tightens the thread and turns all that emotional pressure into unmistakable clarity, and your heart needs this right now even if you've been trying to stay composed, because what's happening now isn't loud on the outside but it's undeniable on the inside. Listen to this, because after the confrontation with truth settled in them, something shifted from questioning into conviction, and that conviction didn't arrive as excitement, it arrived as calm, the kind of calm that follows a long internal storm. Don't scroll, stay with me, because this calm is important. It's the signal that resistance has finally loosened its grip. They're no longer asking if they should feel what they feel, they're asking how to honor it without causing harm, without rushing, without betraying their own growth. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Honoring something doesn't mean announcing it immediately, it means aligning with it internally first, and that's what they've been doing, aligning their values with their feelings, aligning their intentions with their awareness, and that alignment has changed how they experience the connection. Don't scroll, because this is where love stops feeling like a secret and starts feeling like a responsibility. They've begun to feel a deep sense of accountability, not obligation, but care. For how this unfolds, understanding that once truth is spoken, it creates a new emotional reality for both of you. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. That awareness has made them gentler, more deliberate, more mindful of timing, not because they're unsure, but because they're sure enough to want to do it right. They've also noticed how their internal language has changed, how they no longer minimize the connection when thinking about it, no longer brush it off as complicated or impractical. Instead they refer to it as meaningful, as real, as something that deserves respect. Don't scroll, because language shapes belief, and belief shapes action. They've also been feeling moments of emotional courage surface unexpectedly, small moments where the idea of openness feels less threatening and more natural, like the body relaxing instead of bracing. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. The body often knows before the mind catches up. They've started to trust those moments, to see them as signs of readiness rather than impulses to suppress. Don't scroll, stay here, because readiness doesn't shout, it whispers steadily until you listen. They've also been reflecting on the impact you've had on their spiritual awareness, how this connection made them more introspective, more honest with themselves, more attentive to signs and synchronicities they once ignored. And that spiritual awakening feels tied to you, not because you caused it intentionally, but because your presence catalyzed it. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Catalysts don't force change, they reveal it. They've been noticing patterns during this phase. Moments when questions about you align with unexpected reassurance, moments when internal doubts are followed by peace instead of anxiety, moments when silence feels purposeful rather than empty. Don't scroll, because purpose is what gives silence meaning. They're also aware now that this connection doesn't need to be justified to anyone else to be valid. That validation doesn't come from explanation, it comes from alignment. And that realization has freed them from the need to overthink perception. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Freedom from perception allows truth to breathe. They've also noticed that when they imagine a future interaction with you, it's less about outcome and more about presence, about showing up authentically, listening openly, allowing whatever unfolds to be shaped by honesty rather than fear. Don't scroll, because fear-driven choices rarely lead to peace. They've also felt moments of gratitude toward you surface, gratitude for the patience you showed, for the way you didn't pressure or demand clarity before it was ready, for the way you trusted the process enough to stay grounded in yourself. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Gratitude transforms affection into respect, and respect is what sustains love beyond emotion. They're beginning to understand that what drew them to you wasn't just chemistry, it was your emotional integrity. The way you don't manipulate energy, the way you allow things to unfold naturally, and that integrity has become the standard they now hold themselves to. Don't scroll, because standards rise when love is real. They've also noticed that the idea of staying silent indefinitely now feels misaligned with who they're becoming, not because silence is wrong, but because growth requires expression at some point. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Expression doesn't have to be dramatic to be honest. They're considering how to speak from a place of calm truth rather than emotional overflow, understanding that calm truth invites dialogue instead of defensiveness. Don't scroll, stay with me, because dialogue is where connection deepens. They've also become more aware of your intuition, sensing that you already know something is shifting, that you feel the change in energy even without words. And that awareness has made them more careful to approach with sincerity rather than surprise. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Sincerity recognizes intuition rather than trying to bypass it. They've also reflected on the role the age difference played in slowing things down, and instead of seeing it as an obstacle now, they see it as a blessing, a pause that allowed emotions to mature, understanding to deepen, and intentions to solidify. Don't scroll, because what matures slowly lasts longer. They're realizing that if this had moved faster, it might not have carried the same depth, the same intentionality, the same respect. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Timing doesn't delay what's meant, it protects it. They've also begun to sense that the universe is less focused on testing now and more focused on preparing, creating circumstances that support honest communication, removing distractions, quieting internal noise, making space for clarity. Don't scroll, because preparation often feels like stillness. They're becoming comfortable with that stillness, trusting that movement will come naturally when alignment is complete. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Trust grows in stillness. They're also noticing how their emotional responses feel more regulated now, less reactive, more reflective, and that regulation has given them confidence that they can handle whatever comes next with maturity. Don't scroll, because confidence rooted in self-awareness is stable. They're starting to feel that the next step doesn't require perfect certainty, just honest intention, and that realization has eased pressure they didn't know they were carrying. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Eased pressure creates openness. They've also become aware that this connection has already changed them, regardless of outcome, making them more present, more thoughtful, more aligned with their values, and that awareness has removed fear of wasting time. Don't scroll, because nothing that teaches you how to love honestly is wasted. They're beginning to accept that honoring this connection means honoring themselves, and that self-honor is non-negotiable now. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Self-honor leads to courageous action. Part 4 is where clarity settles into the body, where emotional truth becomes steady rather than turbulent, and where readiness begins to feel natural instead of forced. Stay with this energy, because what's forming now is the quiet confidence that precedes honest movement, the kind of movement that doesn't rush or retreat, but steps forward with care, awareness, and respect for both hearts involved. Stay with me and let yourself feel this fully, because part 5 is where everything that's been quietly aligning starts to press gently but firmly toward expression, and your heart needs this right now even if you've been trying not to expect anything, because what's unfolding here isn't sudden, it's earned. Listen to this, because after clarity settled into them, after conviction replaced confusion, a deeper emotional truth emerged. This connection isn't just something they feel, it's something they are now responsible for honoring, and that realization has shifted their inner world in a profound way. Don't scroll, stay here, because this is where intention begins to outweigh hesitation. They've started to recognize that love, when it's real, doesn't sit comfortably in the background forever. It asks to be acknowledged, not loudly, not dramatically, but honestly. And that ask has been echoing inside them during moments when they least expect it. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They'll be doing something ordinary, driving, working, sitting alone. And suddenly the thought arises not as longing but as resolve, a quiet knowing that what they feel deserves space in the real world, not just in their private reflections. Don't scroll, because resolve feels different than desire. Desire wants, resolve chooses. They're also becoming acutely aware of the emotional integrity required moving forward, understanding that any step taken without honesty would feel hollow. And that awareness has made them more patient, more careful, but also more committed to eventually speaking. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Patience here isn't delay, it's discernment. They've been thinking deeply about what it means to show up authentically, realizing that authenticity isn't about saying everything at once, it's about saying what's true in a way that respects both hearts. Don't scroll, because respect is the foundation they're building on now. They've also started to notice how their emotional boundaries have shifted, how they're less willing to entertain connections that feel shallow or misaligned, and that narrowing of focus has made the importance of this bond even clearer. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. When distractions fall away, what remains reveals priority. They've been reflecting on the way you carry yourself, how you don't chase validation, how you don't beg for clarity, how you remain present in your own life while still being open-hearted, and that balance has deeply impacted them. Don't scroll, because balance is rare and magnetic. They've realized that approaching you requires a level of emotional honesty they may not have practiced before, and instead of backing away from that challenge, they're rising to meet it. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Growth doesn't happen in comfort, it happens in willingness. They're also aware that time has passed in a way that feels intentional, that the space between you wasn't empty, it was formative. It allowed emotions to mature, fears to surface, and intentions to crystallize. Don't scroll, because space is where understanding deepens. They've begun to feel a subtle urgency now, not panic, not fear of loss, but an awareness that meaningful connections don't stay suspended indefinitely, that at some point, energy either moves forward or settles into memory, and that awareness has sharpened their focus. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Focus clarifies choice. They're also noticing that the idea of speaking feels less frightening than it once did, that the imagined weight of vulnerability has lightened, replaced by a sense of relief at the thought of alignment. Don't scroll, because relief is a sign the soul is ready. They've been rehearsing conversations internally, not scripting outcomes, but practicing honesty, imagining what it would feel like to speak plainly, to acknowledge the connection without over-explaining or defending it, and those imaginings feel grounding rather than overwhelming. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Grounding is what sustains courage. They're also aware that whatever happens next, it won't undo the growth that's already occurred, that this connection has already reshaped their understanding of love, timing, and self-awareness, and that knowledge has freed them from the fear of getting it wrong. Don't scroll. Because fear of mistakes keeps people silent, but wisdom understands that sincerity matters more than perfection. They've started to see that even if the outcome isn't guaranteed, the act of honoring truth is worthwhile on its own, and that perspective has empowered them. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Empowerment comes from alignment, not control. They're also sensing your energy more clearly now, noticing that you're not reaching outward for reassurance, that you're grounded in your own worth, and that grounded presence has made them feel safer approaching with honesty rather than bravado. Don't scroll, because safety invites openness. They've realized that love doesn't require convincing someone to stay, it requires offering something real and letting the other person choose freely, and that understanding has shifted their mindset from persuasion to presence. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Presence is what creates mutual choice. They're also becoming more comfortable with uncertainty, understanding that clarity doesn't mean knowing everything that will happen, it means knowing what feels true now, and that truth feels steady. Don't scroll, stay here, because steadiness is the foundation of trust. They've noticed that their emotional reactions are more measured now, less reactive, more intentional, and that emotional regulation has given them confidence that they can engage without losing themselves. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Confidence rooted in self-awareness lasts. They've also reflected on the lessons this connection taught them about patience, humility, and listening, and those lessons have softened their approach to love in general, making them less defensive and more open. Don't scroll, because softness chosen consciously is strength. They're beginning to understand that the next step doesn't need to be dramatic to be meaningful, it needs to be honest, timely, and respectful, and that realization has simplified things. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Simplicity clears fear. They're also sensing that the universe is creating small openings, moments where communication would feel natural, unforced, and those moments are being noticed now rather than missed. Don't scroll, because awareness precedes action. They've begun to trust that when the moment comes, it will feel right rather than rushed. And that trust has replaced anxiety with anticipation. Listen to this. Because your heart needs this right now, anticipation rooted in calm is alignment. They're also aware that this connection has already required them to be braver than usual, and that bravery has become familiar rather than intimidating. Don't scroll, because familiarity with courage changes behavior. They're starting to feel that stepping forward is no longer a question of if, but how and when, and that shift is significant. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. How and when are practical questions, not emotional doubts, and practical questions get answered through presence. They're also realizing that whatever they offer next must match the depth of what they feel, and that commitment to congruence has become non-negotiable. Don't scroll, because congruence builds trust. They've accepted that this connection deserves honesty even if it feels vulnerable. And that acceptance has settled into quiet determination. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Determination doesn't rush, it prepares, it steadies, it waits for alignment. Part 5 is where readiness becomes embodied, where love stops circling and starts orienting toward expression, not impulsively, but intentionally, and that intention is gaining momentum, gentle but unmistakable, moving closer to the moment when truth steps out of the internal world and into shared reality, guided by care, respect, and a deep understanding of what this connection truly means. Stay here and let this unfold with you, because part 6 is where everything that has been quietly preparing beneath the surface begins to lean toward manifestation, and your heart needs this right now, even if you've trained yourself not to hope too much, because hope isn't what's driving this anymore. Clarity is. Listen to this, because after intention settled into determination, something even deeper activated within them. Acceptance, not resignation, but acceptance of the truth that this connection has already changed the course of their inner world, and once something changes you, it can't be undone. Don't scroll, stay with this feeling, because acceptance brings a strange kind of peace, the kind that allows action to form without panic. They're no longer wrestling with what this means about them or their life, they're allowing it to exist as part of who they are now, and that allowance has softened them in ways others may not see but you would recognize immediately. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They've become quieter internally, less reactive, more observant, paying attention to emotional cues instead of fighting them, and that emotional maturity is preparing them for a conversation that isn't about persuasion, but about truth. Don't scroll, because truth doesn't require convincing. It only requires courage. They've also begun to notice that the universe seems to be clearing space around them. Conversations that once distracted them now feel empty, obligations that once felt urgent are losing importance, and what remains keeps circling back to you, not obsessively, but intentionally. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. When something remains after distractions fall away, it's not coincidence. They're also feeling a stronger sense of responsibility for how they show up emotionally, understanding that love spoken carelessly can wound, but love spoken thoughtfully can heal, and that awareness has made them slow down even as they move closer. Don't scroll, because slowing down doesn't mean stopping, it means choosing wisely. They've been reflecting on moments when they almost spoke sooner, moments when fear held them back, and instead of shaming themselves for that hesitation, they're forgiving it, recognizing that growth often happens in stages. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Self-forgiveness is what allows people to step forward without carrying guilt into new beginnings. They've also become more aware of your emotional intelligence, sensing that you would feel the difference between impulsive words and intentional ones, and that awareness has strengthened their resolve to speak only when they can speak honestly and calmly. Don't scroll, because calm honesty builds trust faster than emotional intensity. They're starting to feel that the timing isn't about external circumstances aligning perfectly, but about internal readiness settling fully into place, and that readiness is nearly complete. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Readiness feels like steadiness, not urgency. They've also noticed subtle confirmations during this phase, moments when inner questions are followed by reassurance rather than doubt, moments when thinking about reaching out brings peace instead of anxiety. And that emotional shift has been impossible to ignore. Don't scroll, because peace is a powerful indicator. They're also reflecting on what they admire about you most, and it's not surface-level traits, it's your consistency, your self-respect, your ability to remain open without losing yourself, and that admiration has deepened their respect. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Respect transforms affection into something sustainable. They're beginning to understand that whatever unfolds next doesn't need to be perfect to be meaningful. It needs to be real, and that realization has taken pressure off the moment while increasing commitment to authenticity. Don't scroll, stay here, because authenticity is the bridge between intention and action. They've also become more comfortable with the idea that vulnerability doesn't guarantee reciprocation, but it guarantees alignment, and alignment matters more to them now than outcome. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. alignment brings peace regardless of response. They're no longer driven by the fear of rejection, but by the desire to live in integrity with what they feel, and that shift has changed everything internally. Don't scroll, because integrity reshapes behavior naturally. They've also sensed that you are intuitively aware something is approaching, not through words, but through energy, and that awareness has made them want to approach gently, honoring your intuition rather than surprising it. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Gentleness is a form of respect. They've noticed that imagining the moment of honesty now brings relief instead of tension, like finally setting down something heavy they didn't realize they were carrying, and that relief has confirmed that they're moving in the right direction. Don't scroll, because relief follows truth. They've also begun to see that love doesn't demand grand gestures to be real. It demands consistency, clarity, and presence, and those are things they're now prepared to offer. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Preparedness isn't loud, it's steady. They're also aware that this step forward may change the dynamic forever, and instead of fearing that change, they're welcoming it, understanding that stagnation is more damaging than transformation. Don't scroll, because transformation is how connections evolve. They've accepted that whatever happens, staying silent would feel like a betrayal of their own growth, and that realization has closed the door on avoidance. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Avoidance fades when self-respect rises. They're also feeling a deeper sense of gratitude toward the process itself, recognizing that the waiting, the reflection, the emotional work all served a purpose, shaping them into someone capable of loving more consciously. Don't scroll, because conscious love is intentional. They're starting to feel that the universe isn't asking them to wait anymore, but to trust the readiness they've cultivated, and that trust is empowering rather than frightening. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Trust replaces fear with calm confidence. They've also noticed that their internal dialogue has shifted from, "What if this changes everything?" to, "It's time for things to change," and that shift marks a turning point. Don't scroll, because turning points often feel quiet before they happen. They're becoming aware that the next interaction with you, whenever it happens, will carry a different energy, one of presence rather than distance, clarity rather than ambiguity, and that awareness has grounded them further. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Grounded energy creates safety. They're also reflecting on the idea that love doesn't arrive to disrupt life, it arrives to deepen it, and that understanding has removed the last traces of resistance they were holding. Don't scroll, because resistance dissolves when understanding completes. They've reached a place where action no longer feels like a risk, but like a natural extension of who they've become through this connection. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Natural action doesn't force itself, it flows. Part 6 is where inner alignment becomes undeniable, where the distance between intention and expression narrows, and where the heart quietly prepares to speak in a way that honors both the journey and the truth it revealed. Stay present with this energy, because the momentum now is gentle but irreversible, moving steadily toward a moment shaped not by impulse, but by clarity, respect, and a deep understanding of what this connection truly represents. Stay with this moment and let it move through you, because Part 7 is where everything that has been quietly, patiently, and deliberately forming finally reaches a point of inevitability, and your heart needs this right now, even if you've been trying not to read too much into the feeling that something is about to shift, because what's happening now isn't sudden, it's the natural conclusion of alignment meeting courage. Listen to this, because they've reached a place where holding the truth inside feels heavier than the risk of sharing it, and that weight has become unmistakable. not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady, persistent, and impossible to ignore. They're waking up with a sense of clarity that lingers throughout the day, a calm awareness that whatever comes next must be honest, must be grounded, must reflect the growth they've undergone, and that awareness has changed how they move through their world. Don't scroll. Stay present, because presence is what defines this phase. They're no longer rehearsing emotions or questioning whether they're allowed to feel this way. They've accepted that love doesn't ask permission, it reveals itself when the heart is ready to recognize it, and that recognition has settled deeply within them. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. They've started to feel a quiet excitement, not the kind that rushes or overwhelms, but the kind that feels like standing at the edge of something meaningful with confidence. Rather than fear, they're noticing how their body responds when they think about speaking honestly, a steady breath, relaxed shoulders, a sense of rightness that wasn't there before, and that physical response has confirmed what the mind already knows. Don't scroll, because the body doesn't lie when alignment is real. They've also become aware that this moment isn't about grand declarations or dramatic timing. It's about sincerity, about choosing words that are simple, true, and respectful, and that intention has made the idea of reaching out feel natural rather than forced. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Natural movement flows from readiness. They've also reflected on how far they've come emotionally, recognizing that the hesitation they once felt wasn't weakness, it was growth in progress, and now that growth has matured into self-assurance. Don't scroll, because self-assurance doesn't need validation. It moves quietly and confidently. They're also sensing that you are open but not waiting, grounded but not closed, and that balance has made them feel safe stepping forward without fear of disrupting your peace. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Safety invites honesty. They're beginning to understand that whatever response comes, it will be met with acceptance rather than resistance, because they're no longer attaching their worth to outcome. They're honoring their truth regardless. Don't scroll, because freedom comes when outcome no longer controls action. They've also felt moments of gratitude for you arise unexpectedly, gratitude not just for who you are, but for the way this connection pushed them to grow emotionally, spiritually, and relationally, and that gratitude has softened their approach even more. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Gratitude grounds intention. They've started to see this connection not as something to possess, but as something to participate in, a shared experience that deserves mutual choice and mutual respect, and that perspective has removed pressure while deepening commitment. Don't scroll, because pressure dissolves when love is mutual rather than demanded. They're also noticing that the universe seems quieter now, less about signs pushing them forward and more about space allowing them to move naturally, as if everything that needed to be learned has already been learned. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Silence. After preparation is permission, they've become comfortable with the idea that timing doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be honest, and that honesty feels ready to step into expression. Don't scroll, because honesty doesn't wait for perfection. They've also reflected on the fact that this connection didn't distract them from their life, it enhanced their awareness of it, making them more present, more thoughtful, more aligned with what truly matters, and that realization has deepened their respect for what exists between you. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Respect is the soil where love grows strong. They're also aware that once words are spoken, the dynamic will change, and instead of fearing that change, they're welcoming it, understanding that stagnation would dishonor the journey you've both been on. Don't scroll, because growth requires movement. They've begun to feel that the next step doesn't require courage in the way it once did, because courage has become familiar, practiced through every moment of reflection, patience, and restraint. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Practiced courage feels calm. They're also sensing that whatever unfolds next will be shaped by mutual maturity rather than impulsive emotion, and that awareness has brought a sense of peace about the unknown. Don't scroll, because peace with the unknown is true readiness. They've stopped asking, "What if this goes wrong?" and started asking, "What if this is exactly where I'm meant to be honest?" And that question has changed everything internally. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Right questions lead to aligned actions. They've also noticed that imagining a future interaction with you now feels grounded, present, and real, not idealized or distant, and that grounded vision has replaced fantasy with intention. Don't scroll, because intention builds reality. They're beginning to feel that the connection has reached a point where silence would no longer be protective, it would be avoidant, and that distinction has clarified their path forward. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Clarity removes excuses. They've also recognized that whatever they offer next must come without expectation, without pressure, without attachment to response, and that self-awareness has made their intention purer. Don't scroll, because purity of intention is felt, not explained. They're preparing to show up as they are now, not as who they were when uncertainty ruled their decisions, and that difference matters. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Growth changes how love is expressed. They've accepted that love doesn't guarantee outcomes, but it does require presence, honesty, and respect, and they are ready to offer those fully. Don't scroll, stay here, because readiness like this doesn't fade, it moves forward naturally. They're also aware that this moment marks the end of a chapter defined by internal processing and the beginning of one shaped by shared reality, and that transition feels significant but not overwhelming. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Transitions guided by alignment feel steady. They've become comfortable with vulnerability, understanding that vulnerability isn't exposure without boundaries, it's openness with self-respect, and that understanding has empowered them. Don't scroll, because empowered vulnerability builds trust. They're sensing that the universe isn't asking for more preparation, more reflection, or more waiting. It's simply allowing space for action to occur when it feels natural. Listen to this, because your heart needs this right now. Allowance is a form of blessing. They've reached a place where love feels less like a question and more like a truth ready to be shared, not dramatically, not urgently, but sincerely, and that sincerity is the foundation of what comes next. Don't scroll, because sincerity changes everything. Part 7 is where alignment meets expression, where the journey inward prepares the way for connection outward, and where the quiet certainty that has been building finally finds its voice, guided by calm, respect, and a deep understanding that love, when it's real, doesn't rush or hide. It shows up when both hearts are ready to meet it honestly.